I've already defeated you once without my powers. I can do it again.
This is unexpected.
So, about the second half of the reboot. This one is probably going to be shorter than the previous video, mainly because I already covered a great chunk of what the show already had to offer, and also because there's really not much that can be said about the second half of the reboot. I mean, I've already talked about what I thought in regards to the animation and visuals, the designs, the OST, the different elements of the story, the overall characters, and the reboot didn't exactly bring anything new to discuss in this series except one or two elements. So really, I'm left with few stuff to discuss. That's why I'm going to be doing things a bit differently, where instead of the format I used for the last video, I try to sum up the plot of the second half of the reboot and try to comment on specific aspects of each. At first I did consider doing a review of each episode, but I realized it was so... well, nothing. I wouldn't have much to say otherwise. Also, please don't be too distracted by the different time lapses I'm using. It's just that it's kinda hard to play clips of the reboot without getting copyright struck by YouTube.
ああ、ダメだぜ。全然ダメだ!
The first half of the reboot ended with Vixius' defeat and a cliffhanger hinting at something being up with Bloom's true origins. The second half of the reboot starts by picking up on that part. Bloom goes back to Earth to question Mike and Vanessa, and they eventually reveal that Bloom isn't her biological daughter!
You're adopted.
And they tell her how they came to find her. Bloom has a hard time processing all this, but the Tricks, still after the Dragon Flame, manage to capture Mike and Vanessa while the Winx are away and blackmail Bloom into giving up the Dragon Flame. She does that, but instead of respecting their part of the deal, the Tricks teleports Mike and Vanessa to Cloud Tower, so now the crew has to save them. At some point, a fight between the Tricks, the Winx, and Vixius, and Damien too, I guess, takes place, during which Bloom is able to retrieve the flame stolen by Icy as she was unable to fully control it. However, Vixius arrived at Cloud Tower and took hostage Mike, Vanessa, and Robin, who had been sent there in order to rescue Bloom's parents. On their way to Cloud Tower in order to rescue everyone, the Winx and the Specialists receive a message from Damien demanding that Bloom comes alone in exchange for the hostages. It seems like the two would be able to strike a deal, but the Tricks interfere. Meanwhile, Vixius tries to manipulate Damien into fearing Bloom, and he turns into a warlock. They eventually save Mike and Vanessa, and even get to go to a party in Gardenia. All is good. We're back at Red Fountain, where the crew is trying to clean the remnants of the attack, but due to an accident, Tekna is bugging, so they have to go to Zenith in order to heal her. We get a little more information about Tekna's backstory. Meanwhile, Vixius reveals he can summon monsters from the Omega Dimension and gives them to Damien so that he may capture Bloom. He barges in Zenith right as Tekna is being healed, but it's okay because the Winx saved the day. Daphne, somehow, manages to contact Bloom and tell her about a spell. She talks about this with Aragonda, and the girls are now training to create a spell that relies on their bound. Problem is that Vixius uses the same spell he used to turn Bloom into Dark Bloom on the whole school. So now, everyone is becoming mean. But as Bloom fights both Damien and the spell, Daphne comes to her aid. Bloom heals the Winx who had been overtaken by the spell, and they cast a spell that dismisses the negative effects on Vixius' magic. However, in the meantime, Vixius had captured and cast a spell of corruption on Riven, so now he's playing spy for him. The second half of the reboot ends with an episode focusing on Diaspro of all people. Still upset that Sky broke up with her and angry at Bloom, she decided that she had enough with being a fairy and wants to become a witch. But when Griffin tells her that that can't be, she instead strikes a deal with the Tricks to get rid of Bloom. Bloom and Diaspro have to confront each other in the simulation room. However, Diaspro sabotages it so that Bloom could be vulnerable to her attacks. Bloom gets injured, Diaspro vanishes. However, while Bloom is resting, Damien manages to get to her room and almost succeed in kidnapping her if it weren't for Sky saving Bloom. Diaspro's deal with the tricks doesn't hold up because she failed at eliminating Bloom, so instead she goes back to Althea and turns into a witch in front of everyone. The end! Where do I begin with this? I will admit that I flew over some plot points for the sake of this summary, but we'll get into more details eventually. Overall, what I can say is this. There isn't a single even remotely interesting episode in this second half, except the Tohno episode, and even that one was rushed. The first half of the reboot had not a great start with the rough pacing, but it still had some okay-ish to good episodes, even if the end of the first half was basically going downhill. Here though, there's really nothing! I can't believe we had to wait for so long just for this. And how many episodes is the reboot gonna have exactly? Because I have trouble believing we are heading towards something seeing how the events are being played out. But let me explain my problems with the second half of the reboot bit by bit.
ついでに言おう。そなたは無能だ。
I already complained about it in my first video on the subject, and unfortunately, this area did not improve at all. On the contrary, I think it got even worse because the second half was so nothing that most of my notes are just me getting jump scared by how horrible the models for Baby Bloom looked.
Oh boy, my favorite seat. Excuse me, do you mind?
And believe me, it's not the only thing that gets ugly. The more I look at it, the more this 3D-ish, overtly detailed art style with semi-realistic textures doesn't work for a lot of the visual cues that the show is using. I already complained about this in regards to how it made the character design look even worse, but the second half provided new receipts. For instance, in episode 14, the girls are going to eat some ice cream, and the big joke here is that Musa, who never got to taste ice cream before, can't stop eating them. So we get a brain freeze joke, and they even give her a bigger belly at some point. You know this joke would actually work fine in a more 2D cartoony art style, because this is the type of joke you can see in anime, but because we got this style that is a weird mess of realistic textures with cartoony expressions, it doesn't look good. Or how about the presentation for the new story of Mike and Vanessa finding Bloom? In the original, it was fairly simple. Mike found Baby Bloom while he was on his usual job as a firefighter. But the reboot decided to give a bit more details, so instead, we've got Mike and Vanessa finding a building catching on fire out of absolutely nowhere while they are having a date. And because the other firefighters are going to take too long to arrive, Mike goes there, without the proper equipment by the way, and finds Bloom all alone in the fire. I think Konami should hire the Winx reboot team for the next Silent Hill because this is horrific. This scene is terrible. The presentation is bad, the animation is stiff, and Bloom and Mike's expression is just the cherry on top. Look, I can't take gloves anymore with how ugly I find the reboot's art style, and clearly, I'm not alone in this. But can we talk about how it literally works against every attempt at setting up something? In order to make us feel for Bloom and her parents after this reveal that leaves Bloom disturbed, we get a montage of Bloom's memories with her parents. That's a good idea on principle, but effectively, what we see is basically this and this. As a result, I didn't felt warmth or tenderness. I felt horror, because it was horrible to look at. There are other issues in that scene, but the visuals are the biggest issue. Or how about that one scene where Mitzi is drooling over the specialist and this looks like this.
Wow, they're so handsome.
I could go on and on, but I think you get the point. The issues I've already had in regards to everything when it comes to the visuals and animation is just as bad, if not worse. This show is just not pleasant to watch at all. So now, let's move on. I've already discussed all the designs in the first video, but the reboot doesn't really give us anything new in regards to the designs, so this section will be mostly focused on Damien, Diaspro, and Hunter. Who isn't there, you might ask? Well, it's this guy. Yeah, so apparently that guy was never not, even though they gave him the exact same story progression. In the original, Nut ended up siding with the Winx at some point and became a character that would reappear from time to time, mostly filling in the role of comic relief. You know, this ogre, troll, whatever, he's basically siding with the Winx because the Tricks have been mistreating him and for some reason, Flora is the only one who can understand him. Okay, so that one part is kinda interesting. The idea that Flora can understand magical creatures that other Winx can't, I mean. But because now Hunter is one of the good guys and that his original design had no whimsy, we are stuck with this instead.
Oh boy, my favorite sink. Excuse me, do you mind?
What can I even say about this? If that is the attempt to make up for the lack of a cute mascot because they turned Kiko into a plushie, my whole criticism regarding this art style overall weird mix between cartoony art style and realistic textures resulting in unappealing visuals will always be relevant. But what really kills me about this thing is how it doesn't feel fantastical at all. It's supposed to be cute, but it lacks any whimsy. It's not giving in fantasy, it's corporate cuteness! That's what it is!
君の物語はここで終わりなのか?
To mention that he also kind of fall out of relevance relatively quickly, which is either a blessing or a terrible sign of what's to come. I'm kind of running out of things to say in regards to this specific design, so let's move on to Damien. As I briefly explained in that rather sympathized recap of the rest of the reboot, Damien gets a warlock form. I think it's pretty clear that they designed it to resemble Vexius. Even his hair is stylized to resemble him, and if I'm being honest, I think it's a good idea in theory. While I have issues with the execution of this plot point, and believe me, we will get to that, it's made pretty clear that Damien is leaning even more into the dark side with Vexius' influence growing on him, and that as a result he starts to behave more like him, so it's an effective way to showcase Damien's leaning more into his role as a villain. The problem I have is the execution. Giving Damien a blue color isn't a bad idea per se since it's not clashing with his red hair, but the overall outfit's motif and construction doesn't convince me, mostly because it doesn't make sense. The whole outfit doesn't look like something he'd wear based on his regular gown, but you could still excuse this as being an expression of his becoming more like Vexius. Also, I get they were trying to make him look more like Vexius, but to me at least, he ends up looking like Riven instead. This is foreshadowing. I also feel like the colors don't really highlight his connection with Vexius enough, but that could have been worse. They could have given us red upon red upon red upon red. Speaking of, let's talk about Diaspro. So we finally have a better look at Diaspro's transformation, and I kinda want to go back to the era where we only had glimpses of it. Putting aside the weird hairstyle, I don't completely hate this design. The wings are interesting and I like her top. What I don't like is the weird undershirt that doesn't make sense and whose color completely clashes with the rest, as well as the monotone colors. There's not enough to balance the shade of burgundy, so it ends up looking pretty boring. What makes this worse is that it's actually fairly close to her original fairy form, and again, it would probably look good if you got rid of that weird color and the undershirt thing. Just go for a look closer to her OG look and try to incorporate a little bit more originality with the colors. But that's a fairy form. How about a witch form since she turns into a witch? Well, we don't exactly have a proper look at it, but from the glimpses we got, I'm skeptical. The silhouette doesn't look too bad, but when you zoom, it's like the colors for now are essentially just red upon red upon red. Maybe if we get a better look at Jaspro without the evil aura, it will look a bit different, but that's pretty heh. The gem stuff on the collar, the upper top, and the boots feel too stuffy. And while I like the shape of the skirt, I think Jaspro's tights are too dark, so it clashes with the type of skirt she's wearing, and it ends up looking weird. Moreover, this outfit silhouette doesn't give off witch, it gives off fairy. This is mainly because for the entire show, Winx uses a very specific visual shape that distinguishes fairies from witches, one that the reboot re-employs, and as a result, Jaspro doesn't break from that visual language at all. This both means that the show as a whole doesn't do enough to give variety to the witch's outfit as the main consequence of the tricks being the only really relevant witches through the entire show, but also that when it does try to do that, it ends up not giving witch due to the lack of variety. You can't really create a pattern and then decide to introduce something that doesn't follow this pattern if you didn't have some diversity beforehand. Although maybe it would look less weird if it was not drenched in red aura and actually drawn in. You get the point, let's move on.
まだだぜ。ああ、ダメだ。全然ダメだ。俺のへりくつは終わっちゃいねえぜ。ならばこれはどうだ。彼らに与えられた飲食物に小型爆弾が入っていて腹の中で爆発した。つまりトラップ X による犯行の可能性。気づかずに飲み込んで腹をぶちまけるような爆弾の詳細については悪魔の証明。説明拒否。
なんだよそりゃ。小型爆弾
So let's talk a bit more in detail about each episode, alright? One of the big issues I have with the reboot so far is what it's doing with the whole Bloom's true origins. I can completely understand wanting to use this as a main hook for the new audience for the reboot. However, the way it's done is infuriating to say the least. It doesn't feel like a natural progression for the story, and it's mainly because the reboot does everything it can do to delay the plot twist in ways that are cumbersome, making everything else fall flat. Bloom's wanting to see her parents to ask about why they never told her about her having a twin brother is such an example. In principle, it could work as a way to build up Bloom's suspicions about not being their biological daughter, because it wouldn't make sense her parents would hide something like this from her, only to reveal that they clearly didn't even know she had a twin. What brings this down, however, is the larger context of the twin reveal. That being that Bloom discovers this by going to Domino, and yet Daphne never gets the chance to tell Bloom that she is their sister, even though there is so much stuff up to this point that should be hinting at this. Bloom having the dragon flame is firmly established, and yet Faragonda somehow can't come to this conclusion. The show is purposefully doing everything it can to delay Bloom's realization of her true nature, even though the execution of it is pretty clumsy. That's essentially a result of the reboot reusing 2 plot points from the original but switching the order, cancelling the natural progression that Season 1 had. In Season 1, Bloom learned that she was adopted in a different context. Bloom came back to Gardenia for the holidays, was helping her mother deal with some nasty people trying to scam her, and at some point, this guy set the greenhouse on fire, so Bloom and her dad tried to stop the fire. This causes her to have a flashback of how Mike found her, and to let her talk about this with her parents. And then, this sets Bloom's arc of searching for her origins. I'll admit that the build-up might be a bit random, but by that point, we've already had a lot of foreshadowing regarding Bloom's true nature, and we were left as clueless as she was. Not to mention that by that point, the Tricks had just discovered Bloom at the Dragon Flame as opposed to something we already knew from the get-go. So when eventually the Tricks tell Bloom everything and that Bloom goes to Domino, it actually made sense with the progression that the story was following. So while the reboot's hook might make it more justified that Bloom confronts her parents, the fact that this happens after the reboot part that reprises the going to Domino makes everything seem, well, less natural. Also, while the original had its own issues with this scene, notably with the kind of over-the-top dramatic anime effect when Bloom learns the truth and the bad animation, it doesn't have a presentation nearly as bad as the reboot. So when we get to that part, it ends up feeling a lot weaker because the quest for Bloom's true origins feels completely unfocused with all these little bits hinting too early on at her true nature compared to Season 1's take on it. Now in regards to Mike and Vanessa, I've already complained about how much their characterization suffered as a result of the early reboot decision, so introducing this plot point of them being captured much earlier isn't a bad idea to make them recover that much needed characterization. Problem is that they hardly get anything. I don't necessarily mind making Bloom more openly put off by the reveal, but the conflict feels undercooked. And on that note, in order to make us feel for the family, as I've explained, we got a little flashback. That's something Season 1 also did, but not only is the reboot's take on it a lot uglier, it also feels artificial. Like, a lot of these memories feels very, "We are trying so hard to be endearing. I want to be such a perfect, cute, loving family," which ends up looking artificial. I can't believe I am about to say that, but the second week's movie, Magical Adventure, is a better take on the family flashback when it comes to delivering some emotion. Mike and Vanessa are shown to evolve alongside Bloom. The memories have variety to them in terms of the emotion that it evokes. Bloom is acting more like an actual kid, with doing some mischiefs. The moments shared feels more intimate and realistic. Also, that one scene where Mike is trying to change Bloom's diapers always gets a chuckle out of me. This one feels so much more alive than the reboot's flashback, which only contributes further to make you feel nothing for these characters. Heck, even Damien's flashback, supposed to explain why he cares so much about Vexius, while having a questionable presentation and looking just as unappealing, feels like it has more emotion put into it. And if I'm being honest, the reboot's trying to compare Bloom's love for her parents with Damien's love for Vexius is something I feel mixed about, primarily because Bloom's parents are actually healthy and treating her well, whereas Damien is essentially being groomed by a man who kidnapped him. I get what they were going at with the idea of Bloom not trying to force onto Damien the fact they are twins, but it feels pretty clumsy. Now, one of the positives that the second half of the reboot might have to offer is that now the Tricks are working for themselves. But I have an issue with this stealing the Dragon Flame plot point. Somehow Icy knows that it can only work on the same person once, yet she basically wasted her only opportunity. I thought it was interesting that Icy couldn't fully control the Dragon Flame as opposed to OG Icy, but this plot point was crucial in raising the stakes in the first season's finale, and yet they decided to fuse it and recycle that one plot point from season 8, except it's not Vato, But Vexius, literally one episode after Bloom lost her powers. Come on now. It feels like the reboot is scared of actually committing to expand the conflict that it reprises from season 1, and this despite creating the setup. So as a result, the plot ends up feeling unfocused and thus, well, boring. It feels like we aren't going anywhere, and I wonder how it's going to solve all these plot threads with only 7 episodes remaining. The only episode I found myself sort of enjoying was, as I've explained, the Tekna-focused episode, Firewall. Because 1. Tekna having a focused episode, especially in this day and age, is something actually worth celebrating, and 2. The idea of Tekna being unable to feel emotion because she built up a wall so she can't feel sad about being alone anymore is actually genuinely interesting. But this still kinda has problems, notably how rushed Timmy and Tekna's feelings for one another are. I genuinely wished they would have built up a bit more the relationship between these two, and Tekna struggling with emotions, since they provided a rather compelling backstory to explain why Tekna would rather be unfeeling, and it actually raises an interesting topic. Would you be ready to give up on all your emotions, even the most basic or pleasurable ones, so that you don't feel pain? That's such an interesting concept, but nope, instead it's still pretty rushed. Tekna is also the only Winx I can mention having anything interesting to do, given how Aisha and Musa got nothing since their episode had been hijacked by Dark Bloom's side plot and Vexius' planned plot, respectively. At least, this one episode doesn't suffer from that problem, but when it comes to the main plot, it's really... The one thing that I was sort of interested to watch outside of this episode was Damien's progression, because he's the only character who actually does anything remotely indicating at character progression. But now that I said interesting, I did not say good. I don't want to dwell deep into Vexius because I couldn't care less for that man. But I do have a bit of a problem with his character going from outright abusive to him suddenly changing his strategy out of nowhere. I don't think it's bad. I think that there's just too rough of a transition between these two states for it to feel like it's their natural relationship. But I do think it's a better idea to portray Vexius as more manipulative and giving Damien the illusion of control to make him fall more easily into his side. I just wished it was less rough. And on that note, Damien's Warlock Awakening also has a poor build-up. Because the thing is that Vexius is trying to convince him that Bloom isn't that good, but Bloom doesn't really do anything that would make him feel threatened by her. The visual cues we are getting make it seem like Damien is traumatized by what happened at Red Fountain and is scared to see Bloom in that state, but in that case, it would have been more interesting to make a point about him fearing the Dragon Flame itself rather than Bloom, and then have Vexius feed him more lies about it so that he gets the impression that Bloom is going to feel that power no matter what. Not what the reboot tried to do. And it would have made a lot more sense given how Damien also saw Icy almost getting destroyed from it. But, well. Still on the topic of Damien though, the whole sibling reveal really puts us in a wishy-washy situation, because every time they encounter him, they end up letting him go despite he still working with Vexius, and at the same time, he and Bloom can't get a proper talk about it. It's almost as though the idea of giving Bloom a long-lost twin brother was a narrative burden. Well, at least there's something interesting in seeing Damien behave more and more like Vexius as representing his corruption. However, they were unhappy with us getting only one character having a negative arc, so we get 2 more! Let's talk about the one that upsets me the most out of this. Riven. Here's the thing. I am one of the few people that exist on this planet that hated how they erased every negative character trait that Riven had for the sake of making him into a edgy guy who's just shy about music. Because he got everything that made him somewhat of a compelling character erased, and I refuse to celebrate because now he's healthy, as if being a good person now necessarily made him a well-written character. However, that softening of Riven also means that he barely gets to express any negative traits. We all told he has a temper, but I'm sorry, just like Reboot's muse has been emotional, that doesn't show. So when Vexius pulled this corrupting of Riven's heart, I was out. I have no idea how Vexius came to sense dark energy within him, knowing that this version of Riven doesn't do anything toxic. He even gives a flower to Musa in the Tekna episode. How am I supposed to get bad guy from that dude exactly? OG Riven? Sure, makes sense. While he isn't outright evil, he keeps getting into fights with everyone because of his ego, and he cares more about proving to the world he's the best. So obviously, it would make sense that the Trix would be sensing negativity within him and want to take advantage of it. But this version of Riven? The only reason why it's there is because they feel forced to recycle that plot point from season 1. But if I'm being honest, it feels more like something they took from the first movie, which itself was recycling this plot point from season 1 and was being dubious about using it. Not to mention that since he is on Vex's side now, what was the point of having Darcy have a crush on him exactly? What makes this worse is that it already felt like they transferred all of Riven's negative traits onto Damien and gave him his character arc. But now, we have twice the same character! And now, the elephant in the room, Diaspro. Diaspro was already a controversial character, with how the show continually brought her back as a rival for Sky's love, and now the show didn't properly dwell into her situation. But obviously, none of us had any real expectation with Reboot Diaspro. However, this has so many problems. She is literally just reversed Murta, where instead of going from witch to fairy, she goes from fairy to witch, because despite the show's attempt at not all witches are evil, we can't have Diaspro be evil and be a fairy at the same time. No, she has to become a witch. If I had any hopes in the reboot handling of her character, I would say that at least she has some more solid foundation to turn into an antagonist as opposed to Riven, who had all the things building up to that point removed from the narrative. But on that topic,
I'm not here just to beat you in this test, Bloom. You stole Sky from me. I'm here to get my revenge.
I didn't steal Sky, Diaspro. He chose to break up with you.
okay, look, when it comes to the original take on that specific plot point, I gave Bloom and Sky a pass because 1, Bloom was completely unaware of that, and 2, Sky didn't have a say in this either, even if the original show did a terrible job at actually portraying that, and mainly used that as a cop-out so he can date Bloom at the beginning of season 2 already. Here, however, even if it's true that Sky broke up with Diaspro for reasons unrelated to Bloom, not only do we still lack the context of whether they are together because of an engagement or not, but also, it's hard to agree when she and Sky have been very intimate even when he was still with Diaspro. So it just ended up making Bloom look bad and Diaspro as unfairly wronged. And if experience is anything, we all know that the show is never gonna have this been acknowledged. But even putting this aside, did we really need another villainous arc when we already have Damien and Riven? And Diaspro seemingly on her own? Look, at this point, I don't know what they're going to do with the story, and I'm honestly not looking forward to it.